The ocean was too calm for what he saw through the binoculars. A flash of orange, a shape drifting far from shore, and something moving inside it. The Marine steadied his stance on the rescue vessel, narrowing his eyes. It wasn't debris. It wasn't empty. It was life clinging to life. He signaled the pilot to approach, his heartbeat already tightening in his chest. As the lifeboat came into focus, the breath caught in his throat. 5 German shepherds, soaked and trembling, pressed together like a living wall. In the middle, half hidden by their bodies, lay a little girl no older than 8. Her skin pale, her lips cracked, her head resting against a dog's side. The Marine jumped aboard the lifeboat. The largest dog lunged forward with a snarl, teeth bared, muscles rigid. The others braced, ears pinned, eyes locked on him. Not one of them moved from their post around the girl. He raised his hands slowly, speaking low, his voice steady against the wild churn of adrenaline. He could smell the salt, the fur, the faint iron scent of blood. The girl didn't stir. He reached out, inch by inch, until one of the dog's hackles rose higher. He froze, scanning the child for any sign of breathing. Then he saw it. A shallow rise and fall in her chest. Relief hit him hard. He noticed something else too. On the inside wall of the lifeboat, carved deep into the fiberglass, was a symbol. Sharp lines forming an emblem he hadn't seen in years. An emblem from a mission the world believed never happened. He shifted his weight, glancing back toward his own vessel. This wasn't an accident. This lifeboat had a story written in blood and secrecy. He reached again, slower this time. The largest shepherd's growl rumbled deep and low, but its eyes wavered. The girl's small hand twitched, brushing against the dog's chest. Her eyelids fluttered open. Ocean gray eyes locked onto his, dazed but alive. Her lips parted, the sound barely more than air. One single word came out, fragile and fractured, yet it struck him like a bullet. He leaned closer, his shadow falling over her face. That word was one he thought he'd buried forever. One tied to a night that had kept him awake for years. A night when orders went wrong and people vanished into the dark. A name. His name. Not the one on his ID, but the one he'd carried in a place where names were code and lives were currency. He sat frozen for half a second, the sea swaying gently around them, until another sound cut through the stillness, the low hum of an engine. He turned sharply, scanning the horizon. There, slicing toward them with impossible speed, was a sleek black boat. The sun caught its hull like polished steel, and even from this distance, he could see the silhouettes inside. They weren't coming to rescue anyone. The Marine's gut told him the truth before his mind could process it. Whatever had happened to this girl and these dogs, it wasn't over. The lifeboat rocked slightly as one of the shepherds rose, planting itself between him and the girl, gaze fixed on the approaching boat. Its body trembled, not from fear, but from the readiness to act. He grabbed the edge of the lifeboat, anchoring himself. He had seconds to decide. Stay exposed here or move fast before that boat closed the gap. The girl's voice, weak and raspy, came again, almost lost in the wind. He leaned in to hear her. She told him they weren't alone out here, and that the men on the black boat had already killed once today. The Marine pulled the girl closer, his arm forming a shield between her and the black boat carving its way toward them. The dogs stood bristling, each one angled toward the threat. The wounded shepherd lay on its side, breathing hard, fur matted with dried blood where a jagged tear cut across its shoulder. He had seen wounds like that before, shrapnel. It meant explosives, close range, and someone willing to harm anything in their way. The girl pressed her face into the thick fur of the largest dog. Her voice was so faint he had to lean close to catch the words. She spoke of men in black boats who came with nets and fire, of water that burned when it touched the skin. Her small hands clung to the shepherd as though letting go meant falling into the sea itself. He tried the radio, adjusting dials with quick, precise movements, but static filled the air. No response. Either they were too far from range, or someone didn't want them calling for help. He glanced at the approaching vessel. It was gaining fast, slicing through waves in a perfect line toward them. A spark of recognition burned in him as he studied its hull. Same design he'd seen years ago during covert coastal operations. But those had been shut down, dismantled. At least that's what he'd been told. The sight of it now felt like a message from a past he couldn't erase. One of the shepherds gave a sharp bark, the sound slicing through the steady hum of the approaching engine. The Marine adjusted his stance, weighing the lifeboat's movement. Every second counted now. He scanned for a route to outrun them, but on open water there was no outrunning a speedboat with that kind of horsepower. The girl's breathing quickened, her eyes darting between the Marine and the black boat. He recognized the look. Not just fear, but memory. Whatever she had seen on that vessel before had been enough to etch itself into her forever. He couldn't ask her to explain now. Survival was the only conversation they had time for. The wounded shepherd shifted, trying to stand. He knelt quickly, pressing his hand to the dog's side, murmuring something low, steadying. The dog's eyes stayed locked on the horizon, on the threat, even as pain rippled through its body. The boat was close enough now that he could see the men aboard. 2 at the bow, faces obscured by black caps and mirrored glasses. One held something long and thin in his hand. The Marine's instincts screamed before his brain formed the thought. He pushed the girl flat against the floor of the lifeboat and dropped low himself. The first crack of gunfire echoed across the water, followed by another. Splashes burst around them, sending arcs of salt water into the air. The shepherds erupted in barking, a deafening wall of sound. The largest moved forward, planting itself at the lifeboat's edge, teeth bared, fur slick but standing high. The Marine's mind raced. He had been in firefights before, but never one with a child and 5 animals depending on him in the middle of open water. His eyes scanned the sea, searching for cover that didn't exist. Then he spotted it, in the far distance, a rusted shadow breaking the horizon. An old oil rig, abandoned for years if memory served. Not safe, but better than nothing. He turned to the girl, her hair plastered to her face, eyes wide. He told her to stay low and hold on to the dog. He gripped the edge of the lifeboat and began steering toward the distant rig. The black boat adjusted course instantly, matching his turn. The air felt heavier with each passing second, the sun glaring off the waves, the sound of the engine growing louder. Bullets struck the water again, closer this time, the spray hitting his arm. The shepherds shifted with every impact, always staying between him and the girl. Somewhere deep in his gut, he knew this wasn't a random rescue gone wrong. Someone wanted this girl, and they were willing to kill to get her. The only question was why, and he feared the answer would be worse than anything he imagined. The black boat roared closer, the engine's growl cutting through the crash of the waves. The Marine gritted his teeth and steered the lifeboat toward the rusted silhouette of the oil rig in the distance. Spray hit his face in cold bursts, each one stinging like a warning. The girl clung tightly to the largest German shepherd, her knuckles white, her eyes locked on the water as if afraid to see the men chasing them. A bullet tore into the sea just feet away, sending a geyser of foam into the air. The dogs erupted in a frenzy of barking, their bodies shifting to shield her from every angle. Then, without hesitation, one of the shepherds lunged over the side, splashing into the churning water. The Marine's eyes snapped to the spot where it disappeared beneath the waves. The move wasn't panic. It was deliberate. The black boat veered slightly, its driver tracking the sudden movement. The Marine seized the moment, pushing the lifeboat harder toward the oil rig. Every second the enemy boat was distracted was another second closer to whatever cover the rig might offer. The dog resurfaced several yards away, paddling toward the black boat, its movement strong despite the rough water. The Marine's chest tightened. It wasn't fleeing. It was bait. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. He kept his eyes forward, fighting the urge to turn back. That shepherd had made its choice. The girl started to cry, her small voice breaking through the chaos. She said the dogs had always protected her, even when the men came with nets. The Marine didn't answer. His focus was locked on the rusted frame of the rig, now looming larger against the horizon. It looked abandoned. Jagged steel beams, weathered platforms, holes where panels had fallen away. It wasn't a sanctuary, but it was something. Gunfire cracked again. This time the sound was more distant. The black boat had slowed, still tracking the swimming dog. The Marine knew it was only a temporary reprieve. They would be back on his tail in minutes. He needed to use every second. The wounded shepherd shifted painfully, pressing its body closer to the girl. The Marine reached down, resting a hand on its head briefly, as if to tell it the fight wasn't over yet. He could feel the tension vibrating through every muscle in the animal's frame. As they neared the rig, the scent of rust and salt filled the air. The water beneath it churned against the barnacle-covered supports. Sunlight glinted off jagged metal edges, blinding in sharp flashes. The Marine scanned for a place to climb. A ladder, a platform, anything that could get them out of open water. Then he spotted a corroded service ladder hanging just above the waves. He brought the lifeboat alongside, holding it steady against the swells. The girl stared upward at the towering structure, her face pale. He told her to go first, guiding her small hands onto the rungs. The shepherds followed one by one, their claws scraping against the metal, their bodies dripping seawater onto the ladder. As the Marine climbed last, he risked one glance back. The black boat was turning again, speeding toward them, the men aboard now standing with weapons in hand. One of them lifted his head, locking eyes with him across the water. Even from this distance, the Marine could see the slow, deliberate motion of the man dragging a thumb across his throat. The Marine turned away, climbing faster. They reached the platform and moved into the shadow of the structure. It was silent except for the rhythmic groan of steel in the wind. The girl hesitated, glancing over her shoulder at the open sea. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said she'd been here before. She called it the place where they kept them. The Marine's stomach tightened. He had thought this rig might be an escape. Now it felt more like the mouth of something waiting to close around them. The platform stretched out before them like the skeleton of a dead giant, beams and walkways twisted by years of storms. The air smelled of rust and oil, heavy and metallic. Every step sent echoes down hollow corridors, the sound carrying into places they couldn't see. The girl kept close to the Marine's side, her fingers gripping his sleeve. The shepherds moved in formation, scanning every shadow, their ears twitching at the faintest sound. A metallic clang rang out from somewhere deep inside the structure. The Marine froze, his hand instinctively reaching for the pistol at his hip. The girl's eyes widened, and she shook her head, whispering that it wasn't safe to make noise. Her voice trembled as she said the men had always come from above, moving between the upper decks like ghosts. He led them down a narrow walkway lined with rusted railings, the sea roaring far below. The metal groaned beneath their weight, flakes of paint peeling away under their boots. Somewhere ahead, a door stood slightly ajar, light flickering from within. The Marine approached slowly, the shepherds flanking him. As he pushed the door open, the smell hit first: damp rope, old blood, and the stale reek of confinement. Inside, the room was lined with cages. Some were empty, their bars bent or broken. Others held bones bleached white by salt and time. A single cage near the back contained a tattered blanket, a water bowl tipped on its side, and a collar engraved with numbers. The girl's face went pale. She stepped forward, touching the cage with shaking hands, and said this was where they kept her before the dogs found her. The Marine scanned the walls, noticing marks scratched into the metal, tallies, dates, and names. Most were crossed out. He didn't have time to think about it. The shepherds suddenly stiffened, their low growls vibrating in the air. The Marine turned toward the doorway just as heavy footsteps pounded across the walkway outside. The black boatmen had boarded the rig. He motioned for the girl to stay low, guiding her toward a narrow service passage that ran along the outer wall. The shepherds followed, moving silently despite their size. The passage opened onto a grated catwalk that hung over open water, the sun glaring off the waves below. The heat pressed down on them, turning the metal underfoot scorching hot. Halfway across, a shot rang out. The railing beside the Marine splintered, shards of rusted metal flying into the air. Another shot followed, ricocheting off the walkway. The Marine ducked low, pulling the girl with him as the shepherds lunged forward, barking fiercely. The men were coming fast now, their boots slamming against the metal with the rhythm of a hunt. The catwalk ended at a sealed maintenance hatch. The Marine twisted the wheel, but it wouldn't budge. Another bullet struck, this time grazing one of the shepherds across the shoulder. The animal didn't falter. Instead, it planted itself between the Marine and the approaching danger, baring its teeth. The girl suddenly said there was another way, a lift used to lower supplies to the sea. It was behind the next platform, hidden from sight. The Marine hesitated, weighing the risk. Staying meant getting trapped. Running meant exposing themselves again. He made the choice. They sprinted along the final stretch of the catwalk, the sound of boots and gunfire chasing them. The shepherds darted ahead, clearing the path. They rounded the corner and saw it. A small cargo lift swaying in the wind, hanging from frayed cables. The Marine knew it might not hold their weight. He also knew they didn't have another option. He shoved the girl inside first, the shepherds leaping in after her. As he stepped in last and yanked the lever, the platform lurched violently, beginning its slow descent toward the water. From above, the men appeared at the edge, rifles aimed down. The Marine raised his weapon, firing back in short bursts. The lift shuddered, the cables creaking ominously. And then a sound cut through the chaos, the high-pitched whine of an approaching engine from somewhere beyond the rig. Not the black boat, something else entirely. The engine's roar grew louder, a deep, steady hum slicing through the crash of waves. The Marine's eyes flicked toward the horizon, spotting a white vessel cutting fast across the water. It wasn't large, but it moved with purpose, skimming the swells like it knew exactly where to go. The black boat men froze at the sound, hesitating just long enough for the Marine to pull the girl closer against the rattling rail of the lift. Halfway down, one of the lift's cables snapped with a sharp metallic scream. The platform tilted violently, sending one of the shepherds scrambling to keep its footing. The Marine's hand shot out, gripping the frame to keep everyone from spilling into the sea. Another bullet slammed into the metal floor, sparks snapping into the air. He returned fire in quick, controlled bursts, forcing the men above to scatter. The lift groaned under the strain, lowering unevenly now, the last cable quivering under their combined weight. Below, the waves surged, crashing against the rig's support beams in booming detonations of white spray. The white vessel was closer now. He could see two figures on its deck, one at the wheel, the other holding something that caught the sunlight. A flare gun. The girl's voice cracked as she shouted that the men above would never let them leave alive. Her eyes stayed locked on the black boat, still tethered to the rig's side. The Marine's jaw tightened. If they reached the water before the white vessel did, they'd have no escape. He shifted his weight toward the front of the lift, forcing it to descend faster, the lone cable shrieking as it unwound. They hit the lower platform with a violent jolt. The shepherds leapt out first, paws skidding on wet steel. The Marine pulled the girl after him, glancing once toward the black boat. A man stood there, rifle raised, tracking their movement. Before he could fire, a sudden flare streaked overhead, exploding into a bloom of red light. The man flinched, ducking instinctively. The white vessel came in hard, its bow cutting a deep wake. The figure at the wheel shouted something the Marine couldn't make out over the noise, but the urgency in his tone was unmistakable. The flare's smoke drifted low, mixing with the mist of seawater. The Marine moved quickly, guiding the girl and dogs toward the edge of the platform. The waves surged below, threatening to drag anything down into the churning depths. The black boat men were moving again. He heard them shouting orders above, boots clanging on ladders. One of them leapt down to the lower level, landing hard and rolling to his feet. The shepherds reacted instantly, forming a barrier between him and the girl. The man hesitated at the sight, his weapon trembling slightly. The Marine didn't give him a second chance. A single shot dropped him, and the echo carried over the water like a warning. The white vessel was only meters away now, but there was no docking point. The captain angled closer, shouting for them to jump. The Marine looked at the girl, then at the drop. The water here was unforgiving, its waves slamming into the rig with crushing force. A mist of salt clung to the air, stinging the skin. Another figure appeared at the rig's upper level, hefting something heavier than a rifle. The Marine recognized it instantly, a harpoon launcher. The man took aim, but not at them. At the white vessel. The Marine didn't think. He scooped the girl into his arms, shouting for the shepherds. They sprinted the final steps to the edge. The harpoon fired, slicing through the air and plunging into the sea just short of the vessel's bow. The line went taut, dragging in the water. The Marine leapt, the girl's scream lost in the rush of wind. They hit the waves hard, cold water swallowing them whole. The shepherds splashed in around them, paddling toward the vessel as the captain reached down with a rope. The Marine forced the girl upward, her small hands latching on, the crew hauling her over the railing. As he gripped the rope to climb up, he looked back once at the rig. The black boat was untethering. The men weren't chasing now. They were retreating, but not because they'd given up. Their eyes were fixed on something far out at sea, something the Marine couldn't yet see. The vessel's engine roared as the captain swung it sharply away from the rig. Salt spray hit the Marine's face as he hauled himself over the railing, lungs burning from the cold. The girl was already wrapped in a thermal blanket, trembling but alert, her eyes darting toward the horizon. The 5 shepherds stood close, dripping intense, their ears pricked toward the open water. The Marine followed their gaze. At first, he saw only the deep blue swells and the thin silver line where the sky met the sea. Then it appeared, a shadow too large to be a boat, rising and sinking in the distance. The black boatmen weren't retreating aimlessly. They were angling toward that shadow, as if whatever it was held more value than the girl they'd lost. The captain barked something about getting inland before the weather turned. Dark clouds were forming fast, thickening in the distance, and the air felt heavier with each passing minute. The Marine stepped closer to the girl, crouching so they were at eye level. She spoke quietly, her voice breaking. She said the men had been waiting for that shadow for days, calling it the last delivery, that they had orders not to leave without it or her. The Marine's mind raced. The shepherds shifted restlessly, their instincts razor-sharp. One of them let out a low, guttural growl, staring not at the shadow but at the water just beyond the vessel's wake. The Marine moved toward the rail, scanning the surface. For a moment, he saw nothing. Then, a ripple broke against the waves, moving with unnatural speed. The captain cursed, shoving the throttle forward. The vessel surged ahead, the engine straining. The Marine kept his eyes on the ripple. It was closing the distance. The girl's voice rose again, urgent now, saying she'd heard the men talk about patrols in the water, things that didn't belong there, things they trained to follow boats like this. The first impact came at the stern, a thud so heavy it rattled the deck. The vessel rocked, sending the crew stumbling. The Marine grabbed the rail, bracing himself as another hit landed, closer this time. The shepherds barked furiously, teeth bared toward the water. Then a dark fin sliced the surface before vanishing again. A shout came from the bow. The black boat was cutting across their path, closing in fast despite the swell. The shadow on the horizon was shifting too, breaking apart into 3 smaller shapes. The Marine realized they were boats, low and fast, all headed in the same direction. The captain yelled for everyone to hold on as he veered sharply, trying to outrun both the black boat and whatever stalked them below. The Marine pulled the girl close, her small hands clutching his vest. The shepherds pressed in, their bodies tense and unyielding. Each wave they hit sent a shudder through the deck, but the captain didn't slow. A flare gun sat near the wheel. The Marine grabbed it, firing toward the black boat. The red light streaked through the air, casting the men's faces in sharp relief. They didn't flinch. They were locked on the vessel, their engines screaming. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper, almost lost in the chaos. She said the boats weren't coming for them, they were hurting them, forcing them toward something. The Marine looked back toward the shadow and felt a knot in his stomach. The 3 boats ahead had formed a line, closing the gap between them. The water there was churning in a strange, circular motion, as if something massive moved just beneath the surface. The captain tried to cut away, but the black boat veered to block them, its crew raising weapons. The Marine positioned himself between the girl and the threat, ready to fight even as he knew the odds were shifting by the second. The vessel slowed, not by choice but because the water ahead had begun to heave upward, lifting the bow unnaturally. The churning grew louder, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The shepherds fell silent, every muscle tight, every gaze locked forward. From beneath the waves, a shape began to rise, vast, dark, and unlike anything the Marine had seen before. The black boat men were shouting now, not in victory, but in fear. The crew of the white vessel stood frozen. The girl's grip tightened painfully around his arm. Her voice broke on the words, "Is here."
A police officer thought it was just another cold winter morning until the shelter called. They said a wounded German shepherd had shown up at their door, barely able to stand, eyes filled with a pain too deep to describe. When the officer knelt beside him, the dog didn't growl or run. He simply pressed his head into the man's chest as if begging for safety. But soon, the officer discovered a chilling truth. This was no ordinary stray. This was a former K9 who had escaped from a dangerous underground ring that had been kidnapping police dogs across the country. What happened next will restore your faith in loyalty, justice, and second chances. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe every working dog deserves a safe, loving home, hit that subscribe button because this story might just change the way you see them forever. The winter morning in Redford was the kind that made you wish for an extra scarf. Frost clung to every window pane, and the snow from last week's storm had turned into uneven banks along the sidewalks. The wind was thin and sharp, threading its way between buildings and rattling the old street signs. Inside the Redford Police Department, Officer Ethan Cole sat at his desk with a cooling mug of black coffee. At 38, Ethan carried himself with the solid calm of a man who had seen his share of both justice and tragedy. He had a square jaw lined with faint stubble, dark hair cropped close with a few threads of silver, and eyes the color of steel steady, assessing. His build was broad from years of patrol work, and a faint scar traced his right jawline, a relic from a knife fight early in his career. Though respected by his peers, Ethan was not a man of unnecessary words. That morning, his mind was on a troubling case. In the past month, 3 trained police canines had gone missing from neighboring departments. There were no signs of forced entry at the kennels, no ransom notes, just dogs gone without a trace. The desk phone rang, breaking the quiet. "Cole," he answered. A woman's voice came through, edged with urgency. "Officer Cole, this is Janet Miles from the Redford Animal Shelter. I think we have a situation here. A German shepherd just appeared outside our door. He's injured, limping badly, and he's not acting like a normal stray." Ethan sat forward. "Injured how?" "Deep scratch on his flank, torn ear, coat matted with blood. But here's the strange part, he's just standing at the entrance, watching, not barking, not running. I swear, it's like he's waiting for someone." Janet Miles was in her late 40s with a sturdy frame and a face weathered from years of working outdoors and comforting abandoned animals. Her frizzy brown curls peeked out from under a wool cap, and she was known in town for being both warm-hearted and fiercely protective of the creatures in her care. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Ethan replied, already reaching for his coat and gloves. The shelter was on the older side of town, a squat brick building tucked between a shuttered laundromat and a thrift shop. The faded sign out front read, "Redford Animal Rescue" in chipped blue paint. As Ethan stepped out of his cruiser, the wind bit through his coat, carrying with it the faint tang of chimney smoke. Janet was waiting by the entrance, bundled in a thick navy parka. Beside her, under the overhang, stood the dog. The German shepherd was striking despite his condition, tall and lean, with a sable and black coat now matted with grime and streaks of dried blood. His left ear bore a fresh tear, and his back right leg carried a limp. But what caught Ethan most were the dog's eyes. Deep amber, alert, scanning every movement with the soldier's vigilance. "How long ago did he show up?" Ethan asked. "About 20 minutes ago," Janet replied. "Came from the alley, stopped right here, hasn't moved since. Won't let anyone else get too close, but he's not aggressive, just cautious." Ethan crouched, moving slowly so as not to startle the dog. "Hey there, buddy." The shepherd's gaze fixed on him, muscles taut. After a few beats, the dog stepped forward, closing the distance until his muzzle brushed the fabric of Ethan's coat. The contact was brief, but it was enough. "He's trained," Ethan said quietly. "Look at the way he stands, how he reads the space." Inside the shelter's intake room, the air was warmer but smelled faintly of disinfectant and damp fur. Mark Torres, a lanky volunteer in his 20s with sandy hair and a perpetual look of uncertainty, hovered by the counter as Janet and Ethan coaxed the dog inside. "Do we have a name for him?" Mark asked. "Not yet," Ethan said, "but I think we will soon." Mark prepared a padded blanket in one of the kennels, but the shepherd ignored it, preferring to stand by Ethan's side. "He's got old scar tissue on his neck," Janet noted, gently parting the fur to reveal a faint ring of skin damage. "That's from a heavy collar, not the kind you'd see on a family pet." Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd seen marks like that before, on police canines, service dogs, and, in some darker cases, animals used for illegal security or fighting. As Janet filled out the intake paperwork, she glanced at Ethan. "You think he's one of the missing canines?" "I think it's possible," Ethan said. "And if it's true, then he didn't just wander here, he escaped." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the sound of the wind rattling the shelter's front door. The dog stood perfectly still, ears flicking toward every noise. "You're planning to take him, aren't you?" Janet asked suddenly. Ethan looked down at the shepherd, who met his gaze without blinking. "Yeah," he said finally, "I am." The decision wasn't one Ethan made lightly. He knew what came with adopting a dog, especially one with this kind of history. But something in the dog's eyes spoke to him, a blend of resilience and exhaustion, the look of someone who had fought hard to get here. Janet slid the adoption forms across the counter. "You'll need to sign here, here, and here. We'll waive the usual waiting period if you're sure he needs somewhere safe right now." Ethan took the pen. "I'm sure." As he signed, Janet smiled faintly. "What will you call him?" Ethan glanced at the shepherd. "Shadow. He moves like one, and he's probably been living in them for a while." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his new name, and for the first time his tail gave a small, tentative wag. Outside, the sky was beginning to brighten, though the air was still sharp with cold. Ethan clipped a temporary leash to Shadow's collar and led him toward the cruiser. Snow crunched underfoot, and the dog kept close, glancing at Ethan every few steps as if confirming this wasn't a trick. At the open back door of the cruiser, Shadow hesitated, then climbed in, curling up on the seat. Ethan closed the door gently, a quiet resolve settling in his chest. The paperwork in his pocket made it official. Shadow wasn't just a stray anymore. He was Ethan's responsibility now. By the time Ethan pulled into the narrow driveway of his modest single-story house on the north side of Redford, the winter sun had dipped low, casting the snow in a dull blue glow. His house was simple but well kept. Beige siding, dark green shutters, and a porch with a bench that had seen better days. He stepped out, breath clouding in the air, and opened the back door of the cruiser. Shadow hesitated for a moment, then hopped down onto the packed snow, sniffing the air as if trying to memorize every scent. Inside, the warmth was immediate. Ethan unhooked the leash, letting Shadow roam the open living room and kitchen. The dog moved slowly but deliberately, tail low, ears pivoting toward every sound. He was tall, his back coming up to Ethan's thigh, with a lean but muscular build under that thick sable and black coat. Even in safety, his eyes kept scanning, as if the walls themselves might conceal a threat. Ethan had seen war veterans do the same after returning from deployment. Not long after they settled in, there was a knock at the door. Ethan opened it to find Maggie Harper, his next-door neighbor. Maggie was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with shoulder-length blonde hair tucked into a knit beanie. Her cheeks were pink from the cold, and her green eyes carried a warmth that made her well-liked around town. She owned Harper's Hearth, the small bakery 2 blocks away, and was known for her habit of showing up at neighbors' doors with baskets of bread or pies whenever she baked too much. She held a covered wicker basket in her gloved hands. "I heard you've got company," Maggie said with a grin. "Thought I'd bring a welcome gift." She stepped inside when Ethan waved her in, glancing at Shadow with a look of open admiration. "Oh, he's gorgeous. What's his name?" "Shadow," Ethan replied. "Just brought him home from the shelter." Maggie crouched a little, extending her hand slowly. Shadow sniffed but didn't move closer, tail still. "He's cautious," she noted. "He's had a rough time," Ethan said. "Still figuring things out." They chatted briefly, Maggie telling him about a new batch of cinnamon loaves she'd made for the shop, Ethan thanking her for the basket. As she turned to leave, the distant rumble of a truck engine echoed from the street. Shadow's head shot up, ears pinned back. A low growl rumbled in his throat, his body tense. When the sound grew louder, he backed toward the far wall, hackles rising. Ethan put a hand out toward him. "Easy, boy. It's just a truck." But Shadow's amber eyes stayed locked on the sound until it faded away. When Maggie was gone, Ethan stood for a long moment, watching Shadow's uneasy pacing. That reaction wasn't normal, certainly not for a household pet. Something about that engine had triggered him, and it wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Later, Ethan fixed a simple dinner steak strips for himself and a portion of the same, unseasoned, for Shadow. The dog ate quietly, but his ears twitched at every creak of the house. After the dishes were done, Ethan spread an old blanket beside the couch and set a stainless steel water bowl nearby. Shadow circled the blanket once, twice, then lay down, eyes half closed but still angled toward the front door. The night fell quiet outside, snow softening the city sounds. Inside, the heater hummed steadily. Ethan had just turned in for the night when it started, the first muffled bark from the living room, then another, sharper. He swung his legs out of bed and padded into the hall. Shadow was on his feet, staring into the darkened corner by the coat rack, ears pricked. "What is it?" Ethan murmured. The dog gave a short, urgent bark, then stepped back, eyes flicking between the corner and Ethan. There was nothing there but shadows, yet the intensity in the dog's posture sent a chill through Ethan. He turned on the light, and Shadow immediately calmed, though his gaze lingered on the space as if expecting something to emerge. Ethan knelt, resting a hand on the dog's shoulder. "It's all right. You're safe here." It didn't end there. Twice more in the night, Ethan woke to the sound of Shadow barking at unseen things. At one point, it wasn't barking at all. It was a long, mournful howl that seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside the dog, a sound that spoke of loss and fear. Ethan came into the living room to find Shadow standing by the window, staring out at the street, body stiff. Snowflakes swirled beyond the glass, but there was nothing else to see. By dawn, Ethan had given up on trying to get a full night's sleep. Shadow lay curled at the foot of the couch, exhausted but still twitching in his dreams. Legs jerking, ears flicking, a soft whine escaping his throat. Watching him, Ethan felt a mix of sadness and anger. Whatever this dog had been through, it wasn't just neglect. This was trauma, the kind that left marks far deeper than the scars on his body. As the first light of morning spilled over the snow-covered street, Ethan made a silent promise. "We'll figure it out, partner. Whatever happened to you, it ends here." By mid-morning, the weak winter sun had finally broken through the overcast skies, though it did little to take the edge off the cold. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to steady Shadow as the cruiser hit patches of ice. The dog sat upright in the passenger seat, head just below the window, ears twitching at every passing sound. It had been a restless night for both of them, but Ethan knew there was something he needed to do right away, get Shadow in for a full veterinary check. The shelter's quick once-over wasn't enough. If he really wanted to understand what this dog had been through, He needed a professional opinion. The Redford Veterinary Clinic sat on the corner of Oak and First, a brick building with large glass windows that fogged from the heat inside. A small bell above the door chimed when they entered. Dr. Helen Draper, a tall woman in her mid-50s with streaks of white in her black hair, met them in the reception area. Helen's posture was upright, her voice calm but commanding in the way of someone who had spent decades coaxing frightened animals into trust. She'd been the town's go-to veterinarian for as long as Ethan could remember, known for her thoroughness and the soft spot she had for working dogs. "Well," Helen said, crouching slightly to meet Shadow's eyes. "You're a handsome one, aren't you? Let's see what we're working with." Shadow didn't shrink away from her touch but stood still, watching her closely, tail still low. In the exam room, Helen ran her hands over Shadow's body, checking muscle tone, joints, and fur. When her fingers reached his neck, she paused. "Here," she said, gently parting the fur to reveal a faint, pale ring of scar tissue. "That's no ordinary collar mark. See the width and how evenly it wraps around? That's from a steel training chain specific to certain canine units." She stepped back, thoughtful. "My guess? This boy was once a service dog, trained and handled by law enforcement or military." Ethan felt the weight of her words. That would explain his behavior, the alertness, the discipline, even when he's scared. Helen nodded. "And the trauma. If he's here without his handler, something went very wrong." She made a few notes in the file. "You should check with regional canine databases, see if there's a match." As if on cue, Ethan's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket. It was a message from Detective Paul Riggins, a contact in the state's investigative bureau. Paul was a stocky man in his early 40s, with a square face and a quick grin that rarely matched the seriousness of his job. He was known for getting results and bending the rules just enough to make them stick. Ethan had reached out to him last week about the missing canine cases. The message read, "Got something for you. Security footage from Milford, time-stamped 2 nights before your first missing dog report." Ethan stepped into the hallway to call him back. "Talk to me," he said when Paul answered. "You're going to want to see this," Paul replied. Milford PD pulled footage from a traffic cam near an old industrial park, caught a dark green box truck, no plates, hauling a load covered in a tarp. The edges lifted just enough in the wind to show what looked like steel cages. Big ones. Ethan's mind went to the sound of Shadow's growl the night before when that truck had passed Maggie's place. "Send it to me," he said. A moment later, the clip arrived. Grainy black and white, but clear enough there it was, the box truck rolling past at night, the shape of cages just visible beneath the tarp. The timestamp matched exactly with the timeline of one of the missing canine cases. Back in the exam room, Helen finished her notes and gave Shadow a final pat. "He's healthy enough for now, but he's been through more than his share. Keep an eye on him, both physically and emotionally. He's carrying memories you can't see." Ethan clipped the leash back onto Shadow's collar. "Thanks, Helen. You've given me more than just a health check, you've given me a direction." As they stepped back into the biting wind outside, Shadow lifted his head, sniffing the air as a delivery truck rumbled down the street. His ears flattened and his body stiffened, the same reaction as the night before. Ethan rested a hand on his back. "Don't worry," he murmured. "We're going to find out who did this." That scar on Shadow's neck wasn't just an old wound, it was proof. Proof that he had once served, that he had been taken from a life of purpose, and that somewhere out there, someone was running an operation large enough to steal trained canines. Shadow wasn't just a victim, he was a witness, and Ethan knew they were now both tied to a case that was growing darker by the hour. That night the air was sharper than usual, the kind of cold that sank into bone and made every exhale turn into a puff of silver mist. Snow from the previous week had hardened into a crust, crunching underfoot as Ethan stepped out onto his small back porch. The yard stretched to a weathered wooden fence, beyond which a narrow alley ran between his property and the next street. A single street lamp cast a pale cone of light, illuminating the drifting flakes that had begun to fall again. Shadow padded at his side, tail level, sniffing the air in short, deliberate bursts. The neighborhood was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Ethan shoved his hands into his coat pockets, letting Shadow wander toward the fence to sniff along its base. He was just thinking about heading back inside when it came a sharp, two-tone blast of a truck horn cutting through the still night. The sound was close, echoing between the houses. Shadow froze mid-step. His head whipped toward the alley, ears flattened. A low growl vibrated from deep in his chest. The horn sounded again, longer this time, followed by the heavy rumble of a diesel engine idling. In an instant, the dog's composure broke. He bolted past Ethan, claws skittering on the porch boards, and darted inside. By the time Ethan followed, Shadow had wedged himself under the kitchen table, pressed into the corner with his eyes wide and body trembling. Ethan crouched slowly, speaking in the low, steady tone he used on frightened victims during tense calls. "Hey, easy, buddy. You're safe here." He didn't reach out right away, giving Shadow the space to calm. The dog's breathing was shallow, his gaze locked toward the door as if expecting something or someone to come through it. Ethan recognized the signs. He'd seen them in combat veterans and in officers after violent encounters. This wasn't just fear, it was a memory ripping through the present moment. He stayed there until the distant engine noise faded and Shadow's trembling eased. Finally, the dog inched forward, pressing his head against Ethan's knee. Ethan rested a hand gently on his back. "It's okay. Whatever that truck means to you, it can't touch you here." The next morning, frost glazed every surface and the sunlight came through the blinds in pale ribbons. Ethan was sipping coffee when a knock sounded at the front door. It was Maggie Harper, bundled in a long wool coat with a knitted scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and in one hand she held a paper bag that smelled faintly of fresh bread. "Morning," she said with a smile, though it faltered when she saw Ethan's expression. "You look like you didn't sleep much." Ethan stepped aside to let her in. "We had a rough night. Shadow got spooked truck horn outside, sent him under the table like the world was ending." Maggie's brows knit in thought. "That's strange. You know—" She hesitated, then continued. "I've been meaning to tell you there's this guy I've seen a few times lately. Stands around near the old lot on the edge of town, the one they were going to turn into storage units but never did. Always alone, hands in his pockets, just watching." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "What does he look like?" "Tall, maybe 6 feet, broad-shouldered. Wears a dark beanie and one of those heavy canvas work jackets, the kind you see on construction crews. I can't see his face well from where I am, but there's something off. He's there even at night." Maggie set the bag on the counter, her tone lowering. "Last time I saw him was a couple of days ago, and I swear I heard a truck idling nearby." Ethan's mind clicked through the pieces. Shadow's reaction to the horn, the truck on the Milford footage, and now a possible witness to someone lurking near an empty lot. He grabbed a small notepad from the counter and jotted down the details. "If you see him again, don't approach. Just call me." Maggie nodded. "Of course. I figured you should know." After she left, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, Shadow lying at his feet. He glanced down at the dog, who was awake but still tense, his ears flicking at every passing car outside. The image of the trembling shepherd from last night stayed fresh in Ethan's mind. This wasn't random. That horn was a trigger, tied to whatever hell Shadow had escaped from. He reached down and scratched gently behind Shadow's ear. "You just told me more than you realize, partner. Now I know what to listen for." The next evening, the sky over Redford turned the color of bruised steel as dusk settled in. A damp wind carried the smell of melting snow and distant exhaust fumes. Ethan had spent the day quietly making preparations, checking his sidearm, making sure his radio batteries were fresh, and cleaning the lenses of his binoculars. He hadn't told anyone at the department where he was going. This was just reconnaissance for now, nothing official. But after Maggie's tip about the stranger at the old lot, Ethan knew he couldn't wait. The lot lay on the very edge of town, where the paved roads gave way to gravel and scrubland. Decades ago, it had been a construction staging area. Now it was a patchwork of cracked asphalt, weeds, and rusted fencing. A single chain-link gate hung crookedly, its lock rusted shut. In the distance, a low, squat warehouse squatted like a crouched animal, its corrugated steel walls dulled to a chalky gray. Ethan parked his cruiser 2 streets over and continued on foot, Shadow padding silently beside him. The shepherd's coat blended with the shadows, his ears swiveling at every distant sound. His breath steamed in the cold, but his gait was steady, muscles coiled in quiet alertness. They approached the lot through a gap in the fence, Ethan crouching to pass through. The crunch of gravel underfoot seemed louder than he'd like, but the wind carried it away. From here, he could see more of the warehouse, no lights in the main windows, but a single yellow glow leaking from a side door. A movement caught Ethan's eye. By the side entrance, leaning casually against the wall, stood a man in a heavy black parka and knit beanie. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with a wiry frame that hinted at muscle beneath. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the man's posture loose but watchful, the kind of stance that said he was comfortable waiting for long periods without distraction. He carried himself like someone used to working security, and his hands stayed buried in his pockets, but Ethan didn't doubt there was a weapon within reach. Ethan stayed low, scanning the perimeter. The lot was ringed with old shipping containers, some stacked too high, creating narrow alleys of shadow between them. He led Shadow through one such passage, stopping near the rear corner of the warehouse. The air here was colder, heavier, and that was when he noticed Shadow's change. The dog had gone still, nose lifted, nostrils flaring as he caught a scent. Without warning, he tugged sharply on the leash, pulling Ethan toward the base of the wall. There, between 2 warped panels of corrugated steel, was a gap just wide enough for a hand or a muzzle. Ethan crouched, peering in. It was dark inside, but the smell hit him immediately. Stale hay, urine, and the unmistakable rank scent of animals kept in confinement for too long. Then came the sound. Faint at first, then clearer when the wind shifted. A short, sharp bark followed by another, weaker and more desperate. Shadow whined softly, his body taut with urgency. Ethan reached out, placing a calming hand on his shoulder, but his own pulse was quickening. He pressed closer, trying to see more through the gap, but the darkness swallowed everything beyond a few feet. The barking stopped abruptly, replaced by a rustling shuffle that made the hair on his neck rise. A sudden noise, a metallic clink from the opposite side of the building, made Ethan glance over. The guard had moved, his silhouette passing briefly through the cone of light from the side door. This wasn't a place he could linger, not without backup, and certainly not without a warrant. He eased back, giving Shadow a gentle tug. The dog resisted for a second, his gaze locked on the gap, but then followed as Ethan led him into the shadows of the shipping containers. They retraced their steps to the fence, every movement deliberate, every sound measured. By the time they reached the cruiser, the first stars were blinking in the deepening blue of the sky. Ethan rested a hand on the roof of the car, letting out a slow breath. He'd seen enough to know they were onto something, but not enough to act. Not yet. The presence of an armed guard meant this was more than a derelict property. And whatever was inside that warehouse, Shadow had just confirmed, it wasn't empty. As they drove away, Shadow lay down in the passenger seat, but his eyes stayed open, ears flicking as if still listening for those faint barks. Ethan glanced at him, the glow of the dashboard lights catching the lines of his face. "Good work, partner," he said quietly. "Now we just have to bring them home." The morning air was razor sharp, the kind that stung the lungs with every breath. Frost clung to the cruiser's windshield as Ethan pulled into the Redford Police Department lot just after dawn. He had been up most of the night, finalizing a warrant with the district judge and coordinating with the county's special response team. The warehouse at the abandoned lot was no longer just a suspicion, it was a confirmed target. Today, they were going in. Inside the operations room, maps and photos were spread across the long table. Lieutenant Mark Holloway, the team commander, stood at the head, his stocky build filling out his tactical vest. Holloway was in his late 40s, with close-cropped sandy hair and a deep crease between his brows that came from years of high-pressure decisions. Known for his methodical approach and steady hand under fire, he spoke in clipped, precise sentences. "Entry will be through the south door," Holloway explained, pointing to the marked blueprint. "Cole, you and your dog will run point once we're inside. If there are animals in there, I want them located immediately. Weapons are likely. Our intel says the guard is armed, and there may be more inside." Shadow sat quietly beside Ethan's chair, eyes moving from face to face as if he understood the gravity of the moment. The shepherd wore a temporary canine harness fitted that morning, the straps snug over his thick coat. He seemed almost calmer here, in a room full of officers, as though slipping back into a role his muscles remembered. The convoy rolled out 20 minutes later, black SUVs and a marked van carrying the SRT team. The sun was still low, casting long shadows over the frost-covered streets. When they reached the abandoned lot, the vehicles fanned out silently, stopping just short of the main gate. The air was tense, the only sound the distant caw of a crow. Holloway gave the signal. The team moved in a tight formation, boots crunching on frozen gravel. Ethan kept Shadow at heel, feeling the dog's muscles tighten with anticipation. 2 officers with bolt cutters made quick work of the rusted lock on the gate. The south door loomed ahead. Steel, weather-worn, and padlocked. The breacher, a tall officer named Grant Willis with broad shoulders and a shaved head, stepped forward with a hydraulic spreader. The door gave way with a shriek of metal. Inside, the air was heavy and foul, a cocktail of ammonia and damp hay. Light from their tactical flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing rows of stacked crates and tarps hanging from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper in, a dog barked once short, sharp, and desperate. Then came movement on the far side of the main floor. A figure darted from behind a stack of pallets. He bolted toward a side exit, shoving over a crate in his path. "Runner!" one of the team shouted. Ethan barely had time to react before Shadow surged forward, the leash snapping taut. "Go!" Ethan commanded, releasing him. The shepherd became a streak of muscle and fur, cutting off the man's path and skidding to block the door. The suspect, a wiry man in a dark jacket, froze mid-step as Shadow's teeth bared in a silent warning. 2 officers closed in, forcing the man to the ground and cuffing him. With the runner secured, Holloway signaled Ethan to move ahead. Shadow's nose went to the floor, following an invisible trail between the crates. He led them down a narrow corridor toward the rear of the warehouse, where a series of large steel cages lined the wall. 4 German shepherds stood inside, their coats dull, eyes bright with recognition and desperation. They barked and whined at the sight of people in uniform. Ethan's breath caught when he recognized one of them, a broad-chested male with a black saddle marking and a small nick in his right ear. "Rex," he murmured. That dog had once partnered with Officer Danny Mendez, an old academy friend of Ethan's. The last he'd heard, Rex had been reported stolen during a break-in at the Brookvale K9 unit. Seeing him here, alive but trapped, sent a fresh wave of anger through Ethan. "Get these locks off," Holloway ordered. 2 officers moved in with bolt cutters, snapping the chains. One by one, the dogs were led out, tails wagging cautiously, some leaning into the hands of the officers as if trying to make sure they were real. Shadow lingered by the last cage, his nose pressed to the bars until the door swung open. The team swept the rest of the building, finding stacks of dog food bags, training equipment, and forged shipping documents with foreign addresses. Whoever was running this operation wasn't just stealing for resale, they were moving trained K9s out of the country. By the time they regrouped outside, the runner and another suspect found hiding in an office were in custody, the dogs secured in the SRT van. Frost still clung to the ground, but the sky had brightened to a pale winter blue. Shadow sat beside Ethan, calm again, his job done for now. Ethan gave him a firm pat. "You did good in there, real good." The interrogation room at the Redford Police Department was a narrow space with pale gray walls and a single metal table bolted to the floor. A ceiling vent hummed quietly above, the only sound besides the soft ticking of the wall clock. Ethan sat on one side of the table, a case file open in front of him. Across from him sat the suspect they'd pulled from the warehouse, the wiry man in the dark jacket who had tried to run. His name, according to the ID in his wallet, was Curtis Hale, 36, With a thin, angular face, hollow cheeks, and restless brown eyes that seemed to scan every corner of the room as if looking for an escape hatch. His black knit cap had been taken in booking, revealing close-cropped hair and a jagged scar that ran from his left temple to the top of his ear. Ethan had met plenty like him, nervous, calculating, but not hardened enough to face long prison time without considering a deal. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You know why you're here, Curtis. We found 4 stolen canines locked in that warehouse. That's trafficking across state lines, animal cruelty, theft from law enforcement. You're looking at decades if you stay quiet." Curtis smirked faintly but said nothing. Ethan slid a photograph across the table, one of the cages, the dog's eyes catching the flashlight beam. "We also found shipping manifests with overseas addresses. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll listen." For a long moment, Curtis just stared at the picture. Then he let out a dry chuckle, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't get it, do you? Those dogs are worth more than some folks make in a year. Foreign security firms, private buyers, they'll pay top dollar for a trained canine. We just made sure they got to the right hands." Ethan's voice sharpened. "The right hands don't hide dogs in filth or strip them from their handlers. How many have you taken? How many are gone?" Curtis shrugged, feigning indifference, but his gaze flickered a tell Ethan recognized. "More than you know," he said finally. "We've been doing this for over a year. Different towns, different storage sites. Most get shipped out within a week. You were lucky you found those 4 in time." Ethan's grip tightened on the pen in his hand. "And Shadow?" He gestured toward the door, where the shepherd waited in the hallway with an officer. "How did he get away?" Curtis's lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "That one was trouble from the start. Wouldn't take food, wouldn't stop watching us. One night during a transfer, he slipped a handler and jumped the fence. We figured he'd freeze before anyone found him." He shook his head slightly. "Guess we were wrong." Ethan let the silence stretch, letting the man's words hang in the air. "You just confirmed more than you realize," he said at last. He stood, collecting the file. "Enjoy your time here, Curtis. We'll see how much you're smiling when the federal charges drop." Back in the main office, the tension in Ethan's shoulders eased slightly when he spotted Maggie standing by his desk. She wore a quilted maroon jacket, her hair tucked into a messy bun under a wool beanie. In her hands was a large brown paper bag, the top folded neatly. "I heard about the raid," she said, smiling warmly. "Thought the hero deserved a treat." She glanced down as Shadow trotted up beside Ethan, tail giving a small wag. "And maybe the officer, too." Ethan chuckled, taking the bag. The warm smell of baked bread and something savory drifted out. "You didn't have to, Maggie." "I wanted to," she replied. "That dog saved lives last night, and I think he likes me, even if he pretends to be all business." She crouched to scratch behind Shadow's ears, and to Ethan's mild surprise, Shadow leaned into her hand without hesitation. "He's learning to trust," Ethan said quietly. "Good," Maggie replied, "because I have a feeling he's not done helping you yet." Later, Ethan sat at his desk reviewing the taped confession, the details Curtis had provided filling in gaps from months of unanswered questions. Dates, locations, and the pattern of their movements began to form a map in his mind. Every piece of it pointed to something bigger than just a few men in a warehouse. This was an organized network, and Shadow's escape had been the one crack in their wall. Ethan looked down at the shepherd lying at his feet, eyes half-lidded but ears twitching at every office sound. "You've been the missing piece all along, partner," he murmured. "We wouldn't have found them without you." Shadow gave a low, contented huff, as if in quiet agreement. The winter sun was bright but gentle that morning, spilling pale gold over Redford. The snow had thinned in the past week, leaving damp patches of dark earth peeking through the yard. In the back lot of the police station, 4 German shepherds bounded into the arms of their handlers, their tails whipped with joy, paws leaving muddy streaks on uniforms. Some of the officers laughed, others wiped at their eyes. Each dog had been through months of confusion, but now they were going home. Ethan stood near the chain-link fence, Shadow sitting alert at his side. The shepherd's amber eyes followed every reunion, but he made no move to join in. This was no longer his place, his handler was gone, and his future had already been decided. Not far from him, Captain Denise Harrow, a tall woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a neat bun, approached. She was known for her crisp uniforms, sharper mind, and a way of speaking that left no room for misunderstanding. Years of coordinating multi-state investigations had given her a reputation as both a strategist and a fierce advocate for the canine units under her command. "Cole," she said, clasping his hand firmly, "the Bureau reviewed your report. The confession, the evidence, it's airtight. You just shut down one of the largest canine trafficking rings we've seen in this region." Ethan nodded. "We didn't do it alone." He looked down at Shadow, who met his gaze steadily. "I hear you're making it official," Harrow added with the faintest smile. "That's right," Ethan said. "He's my partner now. Off the books maybe, but for good." Harrow handed him a folder. "You'll be glad to know your request has been forwarded. The task force you proposed, dedicated to tracking and stopping canine abductions, it's getting serious consideration at the federal level." Ethan opened the folder briefly, the first page showing the draft plan he'd spent the last 3 nights perfecting. "Good. We can't just wait for another Shadow to show up on a doorstep." 2 days later, the backyard of Ethan's house was transformed into something warmer than winter usually allowed. Maggie Harper was there, sleeves rolled up, her maroon jacket tossed over a chair. She knelt in the dirt with a small trowel, her blonde hair catching the light. A half-dozen bright yellow sunflower seedlings waited in pots beside her. "This is going to be the most cheerful backyard in Redford by summer," she said with a grin, patting soil around one of the plants. Ethan was near the fence, assembling a sturdy wooden doghouse. It was built wide enough for Shadow to stretch fully, insulated against the cold, with a sloped roof to shed snow. Shadow, ever curious, wandered between them, sniffing at the planks and the freshly turned earth. "They'll grow tall," Ethan said, glancing at the sunflowers. "Always turning toward the light. Good reminder." Maggie looked up at him. "That's the point, isn't it? He came from something dark, but now—" She trailed off, watching Shadow settle into the shade of the new doghouse as if testing his claim on it. Ethan stepped back to take it in the doghouse, the line of sunflowers along the fence, Maggie brushing soil from her hands. It was simple, but it was theirs. That evening, the air smelled faintly of fresh wood and damp earth. Ethan sat on the back steps, Shadow lying at his feet. Beyond the fence, the neighborhood was quiet, the last light fading from the sky. He thought of the dogs who had been returned, of Rex going back to his old handler, of the small ceremony they'd held in the station lot. Shadow shifted, resting his head against Ethan's boot. The gesture was quiet, grounding. Ethan reached down, fingers brushing the thick fur between the dog's ears. "You're home now, partner," he murmured, "and we've got work to do." Maggie came out with 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to Ethan before sitting beside him. "You know," she said, watching Shadow, "he's more than just your dog now. People saw what he did. He's a reminder of why these dogs matter." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll make sure they're protected. All of them." Shadow lifted his head briefly, as if he understood. In the fading light, the first of the sunflowers seemed to lean toward the house, their bright heads catching what little sun was left. Sometimes, miracles don't come with flashes of light or a voice from the clouds. They come quietly, in the form of loyalty that refuses to give up, in the courage of a soul, whether human or animal, that has walked through darkness and still chooses the light. Shadow's journey from fear and captivity to freedom and purpose is a reminder that God places the right people, and sometimes the right animals, in our path exactly when we need them most. In our everyday lives, we may pass by someone 2-legged or 4 who is silently crying out for help. When we choose to act, to protect, to love without condition, we become part of a miracle God is already writing. So, let Shadow's story be your reminder. Never overlook the small opportunities to bring light into someone's world. If this story touched your heart, share it so others can feel the hope. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe every life deserves a chance at love and safety. Subscribe to hear more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. May God bless and protect you and those you hold dear.